You know, of all the hundreds and hundreds of crop formations that seem to pop up all the time, if just one was made by a very mysterious source, it makes this investigation well worth it. And that's where I think we are headed. Up next, Simeon Hein on Coast to Coast AM as we talk about crop formations on Coast to Coast. And welcome back to Coast. Dr. Simeon Hein, director of the Institute for Resonance in Boulder, Colorado, the institute devoted to the study of subtle energy sciences, including remote viewing and crop circles. Simeon first learned remote viewing back in 1996 and subsequently became involved in crop circle research. Now, having witnessed the formation of crop circles made by expert crop circle making teams in England, Dr. Hein learned of the extraordinary phenomena, including telepathic experiences, balls of light, and UFO sightings that frequently surround man-made crop circles and formations. And here he is on Coast to Coast. Simeon, welcome back.
Hi, well, good evening, George, and thanks for having me here tonight.
Oh, my pleasure, too. Tell me a little bit about what it was like when you witnessed the formation of these crop circles made by expert crop circle making teams. As you were observing this, how did you feel? Did you say, well, they're all hoaxes, they're all frauds at that time?
Originally, yes. I really thought that humans couldn't make these, because they're so big and complex. And I thought the first one I saw actually was done in the daytime. It was like a paid advertisement. It was a small formation relatively. It was kind of an R and an at sign. And, that was something that, took a lot of time. It was in the daytime. But then another group invited me, for a bigger challenge to watch one made at night. And honestly, I really didn't think they could pull it off. And boy, was I in for a surprise. George, they were a lot better organized than I thought they would be. And they just really worked pretty flawlessly out there as a team. And
how long does it take, Simeon? Let's say at night to make one.
This one I saw at Sherrill in 2001, I believe. It took about 4 to 5 hours.
Gosh.
Yeah.
And these people aren't discovered while this is going on at all?
Well, here's a funny story about it. While we were out there in the field, and this was done in barley, by the way, and this was not legal to do this. I mean, you can't just go into someone's field like this and legally, make a crop.
Yeah, I mean, they're damaging the crops.
Well, technically, it's considered vandalization of crops. They're actually not taking the crop away, so it's not like theft. But, we can talk about that more in a moment. But we were out there. I didn't actually make it. I just stood there and watched. And there was a researcher that was trying to find, circle makers at that night. And the thing is, we heard the car approaching for about 10 minutes at about 3 a.m. And, by the time the car even got close, we were just, you just kind of wait till they go away because your night vision is so good after being out there for a few hours. And you can imagine someone in a vehicle. So, there are attempts to find them, but these fields are big. It's pretty dark. And, when you've been doing this for a long time, like many of these circle-making groups have been doing, you just get very good at it, and your ears are open, you're listening for people approaching and so forth.
Do they make these formations along with having flashlights, or do they do everything in the dark?
No, it's really mostly done in the dark. In the one case, I did see a group used, those CC Crane little LED flashlights that
yes.
you advertise in the show
yes,
a lot.
We still do that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So those are used, but they're taped over almost entirely until just a few photons of light get out. It's barely anything, but it's enough to see a plan. And, these have been planned out for weeks ahead of time in many cases. So each person knows what they're going to be doing, and they're really very good at it. But I should say, before they start, this isn't something that's taken lightly. They actually say prayers and incantations, the groups I've seen. There's kind of an intention, just kind of like we were talking about in the previous hour. There's kind of intention put into the whole process. And I've even heard with some circle-making groups that if they go out there and it just doesn't feel right, they won't do it. They almost ask the permission of the universe first before they do it to see if it's like the right thing to do. And they kind of go with that feeling to decide whether to do it or not.
Oh, how many people in a team?
Well, it can range from as little as 2 people to perhaps as many as 15. And I'm told that's about the limit you can work with at night is that size group. Because
it's too many, sure.
Yeah, it's just a lot of people, and there's more chance of making mistakes and so forth. So it works better with smaller teams that know each other well and working together for a long time.
So, even though they're making these crop formations, do they believe that some of the crop formations are coming from very strange mysterious sources?
That's a good question. Some of them do and some of them don't. I'm afraid that the circle makers are kind of just like other people sometimes, and they can get kind of very rigid in their thinking also. Just like they're people, like I used to be, that thought that humans couldn't do this at all, anything, of any large size. There are also circle makers that now think, I think incorrectly, if you look at the evidence, that they're just all done by people. I think, I've spoken to a lot of people that have seen UFOs and things make them. So there are a lot of sources of crop circles. It's not just people. But some of them don't believe that anything else is doing it now, and others do. And I think you really need to take a look at the whole historical record of crop circles, going back hundreds of years to really come to your own conclusions. I think you'll probably see that there are a lot of sources of crop circles. It's not just one source. It's very complex.
Where do you fit on that scale, Simeon? What's your belief?
My belief is, I'll tell you, I think the most likely scenario based on everything I've been able to kind of put together. I think if you look at the literature, you'll find that there are a lot of witnesses from the 70s and before, a lot of witnesses to balls of light being seen where the crop circles later appear.
Yeah.
And UFO cases. Terry Wilson wrote this wonderful book that's unfortunately out of print called The Secret History of Crop Circles. If anyone can find a copy, it's really worth reading. But he kind of documents, going back way before the 70s, these circles have been appearing for quite a long time. And there's no doubt that they are associated with flying discs. I mean, you had the Tully saucer nest starting, I think, back in 1966 in Australia. And that went through the early 70s where, these structured discs were seen and where they'd leave behind patterns in the grasses and so forth. And there have been, Colin Andrews has documented, I think, at least 50 cases where people saw balls of light, walking their dogs early in the morning. But it seems definitely, from what I can tell, starting in the late 80s with Doug and Dave and other people like that, you had more and more people, participating in the whole process. I mean, we can get into why that is. I think it's actually a very fascinating process. I think the human-made circles are part of the whole process. I don't see them as being fake or hoax, and we can talk about that. It's basically because they affect our cameras and batteries just like any other formation, and that's something that we really need to look into and explain a little more.
Simeon, Linda Bolton Howe, our reporter, gets so upset with me when I tell her that, maybe a few percent are actually made by either dimensional forces or ET forces or mysterious forces other than man-made. And she goes nuts because she wants to believe that 80%, 90% are made from those sources, not the 1% or the 2%.
Yeah.
And I try to keep telling her, I said, Linda, all you need is one, just one crop formation that is made by non-human entities, and you've got one of the greatest discoveries of mankind. But she gets upset with that. How come?
You're absolutely right, George. Even if one is made that way, it shows that it's a much more complex phenomena. We all have a tendency, I think scientists and many of us involved in this field, we get attached to our own ideas, and we become comfortable with it, and we don't want to change. Honestly, George, if you had talked to me before the year 2000, I would have said the same thing as Linda, because I had gone to all the conferences, and I had seen the architectural firms saying that it would take them, 3 days in the daytime, and there was a lot of evidence that seems to suggest that people couldn't do this. And I got attached to that idea, too. It was kind of comfortable, that something mysterious is making all of these at night, even the super big ones and the complex ones. And I don't think I really wanted people to be involved. But later when I found out that people were involved and they demonstrated this to me, and I've seen them, in subsequent years and so forth, I really began to wonder, well, what about all the weird phenomena that are still seen around crop circles, the balls of light, the battery failure, the camera failure, all sorts of weird things that happen around them, UFO sightings. And that led me to believe that they're all real. In other words, the evolution of crop circles is a bigger process that has a UFO ET component, maybe ionic plasmas, as people used to speculate a long time ago, and a human component, and that it's kind of like a hybrid project, and that the fact that we're involved is kind of a little bit like, as some have said, children learning a language from their parents. I mean, we're learning the language of geometry and shape, and that there's hidden energy in nature that we haven't tapped into yet. Very important, And perhaps if humans hadn't gotten involved, we wouldn't have had these more complex formations, which are teaching us that we have the ability to manipulate, natural material into shapes to create really interesting energy patterns. And that's exciting.
Has anybody talked about the possibility that this planet, the Gaia theory, it's alive, and maybe through crop formations, it's its way of communicating with us?